We've got our rear bracket up in position on the frame here. To put it into position, all we're going to do is index it off this upper body mount here. So we're just going to kind of split the difference on that gap. It's not real critical right now. All we're going to do is get it marked so we can get everything buffed off. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to use a paint marker. We're just going to come along and mark all along the edge of where this frame and the bracket make contact. We want to mark it on the bracket as well as the frame, because we want to get the paint off of both of these so that when we do a weld, it's a good clean weld. We haven't got a bunch of contamination on it. This bracket, you just look at that piece, it just lays flat against the frame, index is on there. It's just going to act like a brace on there. So we'll do the same thing here. It's bare metal, so at least we don't have to grind the powder coat off of that one. And again on this bracket. Okay, that'll give us a good guide at where we need to grind all the powder coat off it and get ready to weld it up. We've got this bracket all cleaned up, prepped up, and ready to weld on. We had those yellow marks on it, so we ground off everywhere there was a mark. And when you clean these off, make sure you do it on both sides of the bracket. So we cleaned them off on both sides, and really clean along that edge where you're going to be doing the welding. We're going to set it up against the frame here, and just make sure that we've got all of our surfaces where we're going to be welding all cleaned up and ready to go. So as we look along here, that's all good, that's good. Spot that we usually miss is right back in here. Make sure you've cleaned that off in there so that you can weld along there. We're going to weld along the top of here, all along these edges. This bracket is going to index off of this body mount right here. Just position that. You can center it in it, one way or the other. Just match them so that you get them both on the same position on this frame. And you'll notice that when you pulled the bracket up to the frame, sometimes you'll get a little bit of like this one will do it right here. It gives you a little rock on it. There's some imperfections in the way they welded the bottoms of these frames. So sometimes it won't just ride totally flush against this. So to help us out on our welding to keep the gaps down, this leading edge, if we set it flush on there, has got about 1/4 of an inch gap on this one. So what we're going to do is position it where we want it. We'll center it up on that body mount. I'm just going to rock it up like that. We're going to tack it in position right there. All right, that's welded up there, and by rocking it up like that, it gave us a good weld up there. Wasn't a lot of gap. So now we'll just take us a C-clamp. We're going to just bring the bracket up against the frame. We're going to try to clamp it. If we clamp it clear over here, because of the opening in the bracket right here, it'll kind of tweak that bracket up. So we're going to just do it from just in front of that slot. We'll get it really tight, and then we'll throw one more on it and bring the bracket in against the frame. It just makes it a lot better weld if you're not welding with a big gap on it. So we've got it pulled in tight here so we don't have any gap along that edge. Tied up in here, we'll be able to weld there. If you just came in and tacked a couple of 3 spots in there just to hold it into position. If you just put this on and just start welding from one end, by the time you get to the other end, it'll be so warped that you'll have huge gaps. So just tack it on there a few places. We can move these clamps and we'll get set up to tack it out here as well. We're just going to slide this one forward a little bit. When we do this clamp, we want to make sure we catch it out on that inside edge so that bracket is tight up against the frame over there. Bring it as far forward as we can. Oh yeah. Okay, the last spot we want to get is we want to make sure that that is clamped up against here a little bit. So we'll just come from the back side. That pulled that in nice. By tacking that bracket in a couple of more spots, we'll be able to get those clamps right out of the way and give us better access to weld. All right, our bracket is all welded on. It looks good. Just to beef it up a little bit, we've added this last bracket. This is going to spread the load out across the frame and give us a little more surface area to weld to. When we position this in, we want that ear to just cover that hole, and then we want it to be pretty much parallel with the bracket right there. And we'll weld it along the top, along the edges, all the way around, and it'll really strengthen that bracket up. All right, we've got our brackets on, so let's get the arms put on here. The first thing we want to do before we put the arms on is just do some quick measurements. It'll just save us some time when we go to do the alignment if we've got our lengths already set. There's just a couple of things I want to show you on these arms. These rod ends are not just a straight rod end. It's not just an end that we took out of another lift and put onto the JK arms. These have been forged with the angles into them and set so that when the geometry comes with this arm to the front, you can see that that lines up straight. So our thrust is straight into the bushing, and it gives us a lot better bushing life and control on them. Now I've set this one the wrong direction so you can see the difference. So if I run that down the arm, notice how that's kicked clear off. All right, it gives you a little tag on here that tells you, but just make sure that that is lined up so that we've got a nice straight thrust on it. Now when we measure these, we're not going to want to measure from the outside because the tape is going to have to wind around it. So always do your measurements on the inside so you've got a straight shot between the two center holes where the bolts go through. One thing you want to make sure is that the bushing is square on it. And I usually just take a bolt and just run them in there so that they're true, so that when we do our measurements, everything's square and centered up. So we're going to go 33 And 9/16 on this one, about 33.5. So let's just wind that out a couple of turns. Let's see how we do. Okay, 33 9/16. There we go. Let's turn that around. So we've got our angles right on it so that our bushing's spaced right. And we'll just measure this and yep, good. So those two arms are good to go. Now it's going to be the same drill with the upper arms. We're just going to go ahead and measure them up here before we put them on. We're going to just go with an even measurement. We've got our bushing, it's in line, everything's lined up straight there. We've got the center pin straight. We're going to go with 27 3/4. I've got that one preset, it looks pretty good. Same here. Yeah, we've got these pretty much wound up where they need to be. So there's 27 3/4 on the top. So with the arms, I'll pre-adjust it out. We'll just go ahead and put them in. Now we're going to do our final adjustments when we get this on the alignment rack. We'll set our caster, our pinion angle, get the axle square under it and so forth. But if you've got this at least measured up so they're all even, it'll save you a ton of work when you go to do the alignment. Now this front axle is a TeraFlex, so the axle brackets look a little different than your stock 44 or 30 will look. We'll still use our stock or original hardware to install those control arms. Use the new hardware that came with the kit wherever the brackets have been replaced. So the stock or the original bolts will be used only at the axle brackets, the new hardware everywhere else. Now use a 3-pound sledge and gently tap the bolt into position. Again, don't tighten any joint with the rubber bushing until the Jeep is back on the ground and at ride height. Now I usually leave everything loose and I just tighten it all up at once we finish the alignment. Oftentimes you'll discover that pry bar can be a very useful tool for tapping those bolts into position. Let's move to the rear. On the rear uppers, we want the arm mounting bolts to be parallel with each other. It's pretty obvious if the joints are turned wrong. A good starting measurement for those upper arms is going to be 19.5 inches. On the lower arms, we'll take those out to 35 inches. Now on the lower control arms, the cleveite bushings will go to the frame side, while those flex joints are going to be back at the axle. The bend in the arm is going to point up. That'll give us a little more ground clearance. For mounting hardware, the factory or the original bolts will again be used on the axle end of the arm, while the new replacement bolts are used at the frame end. Back to the upper arms, that gold adjustable flex joint is going to go to the rear, while the black fixed joint is going to go to the front. The bend is of course into the frame to keep it away from the tire.